What's going on, gardeners? It is Thursday, June 23rd, and it is brutally hot and humid here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. If you're like me, you still have a whole bunch of leftover cool weather crops that are sitting in your garden beds, just taking up precious space that you can be using to plant other sources of food. Well, today I'm going to show you 5 things that you should be doing right now in your raised garden beds in between plantings so you can turn them over and supercharge them as fast as possible for a new planting of food. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. And the first thing that you need to do is properly remove your old crop that is no longer viable. Now, here where I live in North Carolina, our winters are mild enough that I'm able to grow food to some capacity all year long. So because of that, I always have things growing in my garden bed. So I can't practice no-till gardening because my garden isn't large enough where I can simply let the roots naturally break down and decompose. There's always some level of activity. So I need to turn over my garden beds as quickly as possible to get the best results possible. And the way I do it is I pull my old plants that are no longer viable and I let them sit out in the sun for 24 hours, and I let the roots dry out completely because that allows for easier removal of all of the soil from the root balls. Personally, I can't stand the phrase cheaper than dirt because have you seen the cost of dirt lately? It is really expensive, and I put a lot of effort into adding organic matter to my garden beds throughout the year to create as much new black loamy black gold as possible, and I don't want to throw any of that out. So I always like to let these root balls dry out in the sun. That way I can easily remove all of the dirt from it and I don't waste a single drop of this wonderful black gold. So try to get everything you can off of the root balls before you go ahead and you discard the old plants. So I just got done removing all of my old plants and shaking all of the dirt off of the roots to save as much of the precious dirt as possible. Now you'll notice that I do have a fair amount of organic matter from decaying leaves left over in my bed. Well, here I have a big pile of old brassicas. It's mostly kale and Brussels sprouts. I'm not going to leave that matter in my bed for the most part because they're carrying a lot of diseases and pest eggs at this point of the year. However, I do have some leftover romaine lettuce, and I'm actually going to peel these leaves off because they are not diseased and there aren't pest eggs on this crop. So I'm going to place a lot of that old leftover foliage on top of this bed to add even more organic matter into the mix, which brings me to my very next point. And that is my second tip, which is to amend and fortify your raised beds with saved kitchen scraps. Now, I save almost all of my kitchen scraps, particularly coffee grounds, eggshells, any kind of shavings and skins from various vegetables, vegetable ends that I cut off, pretty much everything except for citrus peels and things with seeds on it. I don't want to put any seeds in my garden. So here I have mostly coffee grounds, some eggshells, and some celery ends. So I'm going to sprinkle that all throughout my raised beds. And coffee grounds are actually one of the best things that you can save. So when you're going to fortify your raised beds, make sure that you save up your kitchen scraps for a few days leading up to it. Or if you're like me, just save up your kitchen scraps all the time and just add them around the bases of your fruit trees and inside your inactive garden beds throughout the season periodically. My third tip is one of my most common tips that I give consistently on most of my videos throughout my channel, and that is to amend your garden beds with compost. Now, when it comes to using compost, you can use really any kind of compost. You can use a cow manure compost, you can use a poultry-based compost, a mushroom compost. It doesn't really matter. Just use some kind of compost. Now, when I tell you to use compost in my videos, I pretty much always tell you that you want to open the bag, especially if it's a manure-based compost, and smell it and make sure it is odorless and to make sure that it was fully composted. So if there there is no odor and it smells basically like dirt, that means that it is fully composted. You don't want to use a compost typically that has chunks of raw manure or still has a manure-based odor to it, because if it's still partially raw, it will require a lot of nitrogen from your soil to break it down. So it actually works against you if it's not fully composted. It could even burn the roots of your plants. However, when it comes to refreshing this raised garden bed, because we're not going to use it right away and we're going to let it sit for a few weeks, if not a couple of months, it doesn't actually matter if it's fully composted. So even if there are raw chunks of manure in here, you can still use it. Now, if you wish, you can also add an organic granulated fertilizer like a 5-5-5 to your raised garden beds at this stage. However, while it is very good for your soil, I kind of think that it's quite costly to do that. So I don't like broad spreading all of my fertilizers to fortify my beds. I like adding it by the tablespoon to the individual planting holes and targeting those plants because I think it's a more efficient use. So if you have a lot of fertilizer or a really cheap soil amendment, you can consider adding it at this stage, but I'm not going to due to the expensive costs of fertilizer. Now, how much compost you use is going to depend on the size of your garden beds. My garden beds are 4 feet by 10 feet, and I'm going to use 2 of these 1 cubic foot bags for this bed. So I'm simply going to dump them on the bed and then spread them out with a rake and rake that compost layer as evenly as possible to get pretty good coverage over the bed and spread out the nutrients as much as possible. But you're pretty much going to have to eyeball it and figure out what is the right amount for you. It's not really an exact science. Just get pretty good coverage and make sure that there's about 1 inch or 2 of compost everywhere. The fourth tip is to cover the tops of your bed with some kind of mulch. And it's very important that you use a natural mulch, preferably one that is going to break down quickly, because the purpose here is to add organic matter to your soil while also preserving the contents and integrity of the garden soil underneath. So here I'm using a natural triple shredded hardwood bark mulch, and I love using this stuff in my garden because it breaks down very quickly and it quickly adds organic matter to your soil because of the faster decomposition rate. However, you don't have to necessarily go out and purchase a mulch if you don't need to. You can use weed and seed-free grass clippings if you have a really nice lawn and you can just use those bagged clippings. You can use broken shredded old leaves that you get out of the woods. You can use a relatively seed-free straw. Just use something that will break down and decompose quickly. So for this instance, I recommend not using something like a cypress, cedar, or redwood mulch because they're rot resistant, and you really kind of want this to break down and decompose a little bit while the beds are resting. Now, whatever you choose to use, of course, never use a dyed mulch, because what dyed mulches usually are is thrown away broken ends of wood and things like old pallets that are then broken down and then artificially dyed to make it look like it's good quality wood when it's really just junk construction scraps. It's important that you go out and you get yourself a good quality all natural mulch. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 bags, which are 2 cubic feet each, and I'm going to spread them along the tops of my garden beds in a layer about 2 inches thick or so, and I think 2 bags is enough to handle my raised garden beds. Of course, the quantity that you need will vary based on the amount of area that you're trying to cover. And the fifth and final tip is something that is often overlooked and underutilized, and that is once your raised bed has been topped with the compost and mulch and it's pretty much ready to go, you should cover it with a tarp. And you want to do this for a few reasons. Number one, the tarp is going to heat up during the sun, especially in the summer, and that added heat is going to help with the decomposition process. So it's going to speed up the natural soil microbiology, it's going to consume that compost faster, it's going to help the mulch break down faster. However, there are also more benefits. Number two, it is going to prevent any weed seeds from germinating that may be mixed into your raised beds. Right now, there's a lot of weed seeds floating around and everything germinates so quickly because it's so warm. Placing this tarp on will prevent that by blocking light. And number three, one of the other benefits of tarping is that additional heat that's going to build up is going to kill some of the weed seeds that may be trapped underneath the surface or on the surface of your raised beds. And it's also going to potentially kill off any kind of pathogenic bacteria that may be in your soil. So if you have any kind of blight or some kind of fungus in your soil, the tarp will help things heat up. Is it going to kill all of the seeds and all of the diseases in your soil? Absolutely not, but it does help add a little element of control there. So I recommend that you take a tarp and you pull it over your raised beds and you secure the ends with bricks or stone or wood or something to hold it down, because that will help accelerate the decomposition process and prevent the weed germination like I previously mentioned. Now the question is, how long should I leave my raised bed tarped before I can use it again? Well, the answer to that question is it really varies based on where you live, how warm your climate is, and what you're going to plant and exactly when you want to use it. Now, I've run this experiment before, and what I found was in the winter time, 60 days was enough to basically get really good, if not complete, decomposition of the kitchen scraps and have an adequate amount of time to turn over your raised bed for another planting. Since we're in the summer, it is obviously going to break down and decompose a lot more quickly because it's so much warmer and the soil biology is so much more active. So probably somewhere in the 30 to 60 day range, 1 to 2 months, is enough time to let this raised bed sit before you can plant in it again. But feel free to experiment with different rest times in your unique location and see how it performs. You may notice a difference. And that right there is how you can quickly turn over a raised bed and supercharge it for the next planting. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use for real, in real life in my garden, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront link in the video description. And while you're there, check out my Spreadshop link for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Oh, here we have a very sad boy. Mr. Dale wants to go outside and play with his ball so badly, but he's not allowed to go outside because Mommy is mowing the lawn, and Dale will attack the lawnmower. There's Mommy doing such a good job mowing the lawn. I know you want to go outside and play, buddy, but you can't with the lawnmowers. When the lawnmowers goes away, we'll take you outside to play, okay, Mr. Squeaker? Okay, Mr. Squeaker. Can I see the ball? Can I see? Oh, you're such a good boy. Oh, we're lucky to have such a good boy.